Good afternoon, greetings and salutations. A little bit freaked out. I hit the go live button, and for the first time ever, it was just like an error occurred. And I was like, okay, I just hit it again and it worked. So I'm going to assume it was a temporary glitch, but like always, if you are watching this stream, I would love to see a quick comment just so that I know that I'm not talking to the void, and I could see if any of my regular people are around. Um, Whenever I ask people to comment, I always forget that I'm like, 15 seconds or so ahead. I'm like, why aren't people responding immediately? I can be a little bit demanding. People who know me well would probably agree with that. Anyway, happy Acolyte Day. If you weren't aware, tonight is the premiere of The Acolyte on Disney Plus, the latest Star Wars show, 8 p.m. Central. I know I will be watching immediately. Very happy that they aren't premiering these anymore at like 12:01 a.m. because I used to wake up at like 5 a.m. To catch new episodes of Mandalorian, if I remember right, and kind of like it better if I could just watch it at night and not wake up so early, even though it's worth it. Anyway, that is what I'm looking forward to tonight, but that's not what we're going to be talking about today. And again, if you are in the room, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, if you're watching this on YouTube, just shoot me a quick comment. Let me know that you are alive and that I have somebody out there who is paying attention to all this. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that has been something that I've been uh, working with for 10 years, actually, which is kind of scary. Um, Thank you, Sue. As long as I get one comment, I am happy. I know at least there's one other person out there. Um, so yeah, this is a topic that's been around for a while. When I got my first job in developer relations, it was for Adobe in 2013. That was during a time when they were making a really big HTML push. Um, Flash was still pretty big, but they were uh, talking and promoting the web platform. It was a really, really cool time. And I got my first job as a developer advocate. And at the time, it was basically just push the platform. Like, don't worry about products, just push the web platform, which admittedly may not make terrible business sense, but I loved it because I had kind of free reign to go deep. And this also coincides with about the time when I stopped doing as much server side work, was doing more client side work. So it was like a perfect matchup. So this was also the time of HTML5 and lots of new features, etc. I gravitated towards the kind of non-visual, more developer type web platform stuff. So I wasn't really interested in CSS. I wasn't really interested in like Canvas to like draw and do games and stuff, although I did a couple of things there as well. Uh, yeah. Sue talking about Adobe Flex. So, for those of you who don't know, Flex was like a developer version of Flash where you could use tags and layout stuff to build Flash interfaces. I spent some time in that as well. I will really date myself and say I also did a lot of Adobe Air, which was a way to build mobile applications and desktop applications using Flex, also HTML as well. That was a short-lived Adobe project. Um, but yeah, so I gravitated towards the more developer-centric stuff, and part of the area that I was really into was this idea of client-side data storage. Now, I think most of us are pretty aware of cookies because that's been around since day one, essentially. And it's a way to store a little bit of data on the client's browser. but it's certainly not terribly reliable and not fun to work with. But for a long time now, there have actually been a couple of more options. Two of them, the kind of two primary ones, would be web storage, which we all kind of call local storage. Local storage is actually a implementation of the web storage API. There are actually two versions of that. There's local storage and session storage. They both have the same API. They're both key value systems, but session storage will go away as soon as you close the browser, whereas local storage will persist. And I put that in quotes because the user can wipe that anytime they want. The operating system can make a choice to wipe that data. But web storage was one of the ways to store data on the client, and IndexedDB was the other way. Actually, back in 2013, there was a third way called Web SQL, which was essentially SQLite bundled in the browser. I really, really liked SQLite. Web SQL was really, really bummed when it went away, and there are reasons for that, which I don't necessarily agree with, or I didn't back then. I haven't thought about it for a long time, but Web SQL went away, and we were left with essentially web storage and IndexedDB. Now, I kind of make a separation between storing data on the client versus storing files on the client. If you were at my last live stream or my last couple of live streams where I was working on a PWA, I used a service worker and I used the ability to have programmatic access to the browser's cache. That is client side storage, but is more file based. And yes, files are data. Um, but I like, to me, a picture of a cat, cat.jpg, that is different than for example, a JSON object representing a cat, an abstract with a name and age and all that. So to me, the service worker cache, that access that you have, that's not the same as a more data centric um, API caching that you have, again, with web storage and IndexedDB. So local storage, again, the primary version of web storage people use, gets a lot of use because it is really easy to use. Key value, so store preferred name and value equals Raymond. You can't store complex objects, but you can serialize a JSON and deserialize back. It is incredibly easy. It is a synchronous interface, which means if you were to store a crap ton of data in local storage, you could see performance issues. But I don't think most people are doing that, and you should not do that. Uh, but it's popular because it is so really easy to use. IndexedDB, and I came into learning about IndexedDB after realizing I couldn't use Web SQL anymore, which was pretty easy. Is not as easy to use. It is somewhat overwrought in terms of the APIs. Nothing wrong with it at all. Uh, but I'm reminded of when I go to the doctor and they make me fill out a form, and it's the same data I've already given them, and that's just the process, and I got to do all this extra crap for the process. Um, yeah, IndexedDB, there's a lot of process involved, but you kind of hide that process away in methods. You don't necessarily think about it. I will say that once you've worked with IndexedDB a couple of times, and I should say, it's not IndexedDB, it's IndexedDB. I know I have said IndexedDB like probably half the time over the last 10 years or so, and I will probably say it half the time tonight as well. And I've seen people talk about it online, social media, and they say IndexedDB as well. It is IndexedDB. Um, but yeah, I began using it like native, naked, no libraries, whatever, just vanilla. And again, it was a bit frustrating And you'll see some of that today. But after you do it, it's okay. There are some libraries that make it really, really easy to use, and we may follow up this session with basically, taking what we built today and doing it the easy way with a good wrapper library. But yeah, so that was like a lot of intro talking about it. Let's actually kind of get into it. And I am going to move this over here, saw like that. And I'm going to switch to my, gotta make sure I picked the right one. Should be this one. Cool. So this is the MDN documentation for working with IndexedDB. I am not obviously going to be reading this aloud, but I like to share this. And in fact, let me give you that URL. I actually made a little banner for it, but that is where you can find the documentation. I will say, again, or maybe not again, not sure if I said this yet already, but every single aspect of IndexedDB will be asynchronous, and it does not support promises in the current API. However, and what we will be doing is that we can wrap everything with promises to make it a little bit easier to use. So, high level, IndexedDB is a NoSQL type solution. So you can kind of think like MongoDB and Fauna and stuff like that. At the top level, it has a database. Now, like web storage, like cookies, any database that you create is going to be locked to your particular domain. So you don't have to worry about some other website reading any information that you would put in a IndexedDB database. You can name it whatever you want and don't worry about conflicts with other websites. You can have as many databases as you would like for just your sanity. I would imagine that for your website, you would probably only have one unless you're a very large website with multiple different sections and stuff like that, and multiple different teams working on stuff, and you need separation. But typically, your website's going to have one database. That's like the top level container of where your information will be. Underneath that, you have your object stores, and your object stores, if you have any, regular SQL database type experience, object store is just like a database table. So it is a silo that you would put your information in. So if I was like mimicking like an intranet, like a company database type thing, then IndexedDB, you can imagine a object store for people, an object store for departments, an object store for support, and so forth and so forth. That's the next level down. Beneath that is the index. Now, my experience with index, so I spent many years doing cold fusion backend type stuff and a lot of work with databases, and I typically did the bare minimum for a database just to get stuff working, and I let the DBAs make nice databases. Back then, my knowledge of indexes were like, oh yeah, if I'm doing a bunch of stuff on something, like I have a people table and I'm doing a lot on last name. If I create an index, that will help the database perform better. It'll know how to find people quicker. It'll make searches better and all that. Uh, it was always something that was like important, but at the same time, not being a DBA, I didn't necessarily worry too much about it. In IndexedDB, you absolutely have to worry about it because the only way that you can find data is via a index. So if I'm creating a IndexedDB for people and I know that I need to search by their last name, then I must create an index. Well, I say must. You can actually get all of the data in memory and just use regular JavaScript to find stuff. But at that point, you're kind of not actually using the power of the actual database if you grab everything. And to be fair, I have seen people do that in server-side code where they didn't know how to write a SQL query properly to get the right information. So they got all the records, and then they did whatever they wanted to in their code, and that's bad. So don't do that. So there are a couple of more things. For example, there are transactions, and pretty much everything we do will be in a transaction. But mental model wise, we can think database, object stores, and indexes with them. So, actually, before I get into code, I will show the can I use. Again, I've been working with IndexedDB since 2013 or so, and it pretty much has been just fine for a long time. There was an issue a long time ago with iOS, and I actually did a blog post on it. I'm trying to think if they linked to it. They may not anymore. But like iOS 2 or something like broke IndexedDB. That may come as shock to you that Apple did something to break the web platform. But yeah. Uh refers to oh look, there's my blog post actually right there. Partial support in Safari 7 to 9. Let me actually open that in the browser. And oh sorry, iOS 8, not iOS 2, but that was 2014. Um But yeah, that has been fixed. But in general, you don't have to worry about browser support. It's just there. So let's actually build a quick demo. Um, I am starting with an HTML page that I already laid out. That is Milligram there, a little CSS framework that my buddy Todd Sharp introduced me to about a year or so ago. And I have right now a mostly blank JavaScript file. Basically DOM content loaded. And what I want to do, and look at I have a cheat sheet on the right here, on the left here, to help me with the code a bit. What I want to start off with is just opening the database. Like that's it. And what we're going to do, I am going to make it a separate function. By init function, this is a pattern I typically use. DOM content load is when the page is ready. Init do startup stuff. I am going to just say, what should we say? Database equals await get database. All right, and that does not exist yet. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to need a handle to my database object. So I'm just going to say let DB make it null. And this should scope to my entire script. And in theory, now I have an error because I'm not actually doing this. Async function get database. All right. And just for the heck of it, make sure it's working. And I'm going to go to my terminal, and we're in the code break folder, and I called it IDB1, dub, and this should open up my last browser. All right, go to console, and bam. All right. So third-party cookie will be blocked. I don't care about that. All I care about is I get DB called. Okay, I'm not worried about fav icon. So how do we open a database? So that is fairly easy. And I say fairly easy. Because it's asynchronous, I'm going to create a request, IndexedDB.open, and actually, I was so focused on me wanting to do a stream on IndexedDB. I wasn't really sure like what I wanted to actually build. I typically do like a contacts database. Sometimes when I work with this, I do a notes database. We could do a to do, which is kind of like, a standard web app demo. Um, and I kind of like to-dos, or they're relatively simple. So you know what? We will do a to-dos database. Now, here is the fun thing. When we open our database, we give it a version number. This is completely free form. It is a number. It could be one, it could be a million, it could be anything. Typically, it's going to be one. So we will keep it at one. Actually, heck yeah. Thank you, Sue. You know what? You may be the only one here today. You're the only one who's commented so far, but your comments rock. I love the idea of recipes. Although it does open the question, like, if I had a recipes database, it is only on the client. Like, how would I sync that to a server? I have some thoughts on that I'll share at the end. Remind me if I don't. So you know what? Let's actually change this to recipes. And recipes can actually get pretty complex. I'm going to keep it a little bit simple for now. So I mentioned that everything with IndexedDB is asynchronous. The fact that we have a request is an example of that. So what I need to do then is add some event handlers for that. I'm going to add a on error, like so. In theory, it should never error, in theory, but I will say error opening DB, and we will just console it out, and we'll do nothing more. In a real application, you should tell the user, you should do something, but for now, we're just going to do that. We have a request dot on success equals event. And, oh, nope, not that. Console.log e. Now, I should actually do something here, but I would just want to console it out so y'all can see. And then there's one more kind of crucial one, request.on upgrade needed. All right, and let me add some console.log messages because I'm a professional developer. And this. So what is this? So I mentioned, and I keep saying it, like IndexedDB can be a bit overwrought, a bit complex. One of its complexities is that when you want to set up your database, so I'm going to use 3 object stores. I'm just putting that out there randomly. And I'm going to have, these particular indexes on those object stores so I could search them. You are only allowed to do that when the database is being upgraded. So when is the database upgraded? The first time the user comes to this site and they don't have the database, essentially it's like a null version. So when the browser sees open recipes version 1, that is a upgrade. The second time I come here, it will not upgrade, which means I am not allowed to change the structure. Now, right away, that means this code is going to bite us in the butt, but that's okay because I'm going to show you how to use DevTools to fix that. It also means that you should be really, really sure about your database structure, because here's what happens. So I create recipes and it has 3 object stores. And then later on, I realized, oh, I really need a 4th because, what's missing from my recipes is my life story, because everybody knows that when you're searching for a recipe, you don't want the recipe. You want to read about how the author went on a trip to Paris and during college and did blah, blah, blah. That's much more important than the actual recipe. So if I decide that I need a 4th object store, here's what I have to do. I go in my code, I could do 1 to 10. I could do 1 to 2. I just change it. No big whoop, right? The next time a user comes to the site, if they are a visitor who've been there before, they will get the on upgrade needed event. But if you're a new person, you will also get that event. Now, If you are an existing user, you already have those 3 object stores. I can't recreate those 3 object stores. I have to start doing logic that basically says, "Hey, I've added a 4th one, but let me see. Do you have the first 3? Yes? Then I'm gonna skip that and just give you the 4th. If you don't have the first 3, I'm gonna set them up and then do the 4th." So, that's not obviously impossible, but it gets a bit gnarly. So, one of the things I recommend is that, try to have a real good idea of what your data needs are. And to be honest, if you were using a real database, the same thing would apply. Anyone who's ever had to migrate data in a database knows that it is not pleasant. So I don't mean to pick on IndexedDB here as being any more unpleasant, but anyway. So we have all this, and I'm just going to save it. And actually, before I save it, make sure my console is it's already saving. I'll save it again. All right. So because my browser was kind of reloading while we worked, I actually missed the on upgrade. But first, let me show you what the event for on success looks like. It has a, I'm just looking real quick. It has a target value and a result value, and the result value is actually the database. So what we care about is e.target.result, and we need to return that. So how are we going to do that? Because this is all event based and we have all this. The way I'm going to kind of handle this is wrap this all in a new promise, resolve, reject, and drop all that crap in the promise. And what I'm going to do is we will go ahead and reject E here if that happens. And we will resolve, if I could type right, E target result. Basically, return that. I don't need that console anymore. But now, if I go back to my init, I could say, got my DB, and DB, and this should be an instance of IndexedDB something or another. But let me just look at this and boom, got my database. Yep. Now, obviously, because this ran immediately, everything I said about wanting to create object stores and all that, I can't because it's not an upgrade. I'd have to change the version. However, I'm going to go on my DevTools, go on Application, and they have a panel for IndexedDB, and there is recipes. And you can see right now it's pretty much empty. So I will just, I thought for sure they had a delete option there. Well, heck, I wonder if it's Chrome, although they're both sharing. Hmm. I mean, there is obviously a way to delete a database. I can go into storage. Yeah, you know what? Let's just clear it that way. And it's gone. Of course, I killed everything, but that's all right. So I'm going to go back here and I'm not going to save while I work. And we're going to create our object stores. So here's how we could do that. The upgrade needed event, it gets passed a copy of the database. So I could say let DB, and it's the same place as my on success. So DB is now a handle to that database. And I'm going to create an object store. Let object store, that's a very generic name. Let's say recipe store equals DB, and create object store and give it a name of recipes. Now, there are multiple options that you can pass here. And you see Visual Studio Code is giving me some options. I think for right now, we will just kind of keep it blank for now. And we won't actually create any indexes now. So we won't be able to do any searching, but I'm thinking for this particular session, we're going to focus on some real basic CRUD. And then in the next one, we'll add the indexes and talk about searching and stuff like that. So let me actually move this up here. Excuse me. And I am not using this. So you know what? I don't need that result. We can just do that. And so in theory now, I will come here. I deleted my database. So when I do the open, it's going to run on upgrade needed. It will create the object store. And then on successful run, and I will back in my code, get a handle to my DB. So save and cross your fingers, go on the console, and bam, great. We saw get DB, we saw on upgrade needed, we saw on success. And if we actually look at our database again, we should see, guess what? We have a recipes data object store. You do have the option to completely empty it. That's there, and also right click as well. You don't have the option to delete the data store. You can, again, in an on upgrade needed, if for some reason you decided I want to drop an entire table, not table, object store, you can do that. But we are not going to do that. So what I want to do is, for the heck of it, let's save some data. Now, normally I would have, well, not normally. Let's just do it. Let's start mocking out our UI a little bit. So I'm gonna make a div for recipe list, and I'll say this is where existing recipes will go. Close that, and this will be for recipe form. We'll have a div for where we can start adding data. Now, later on, this just needs to be more complex to support editing existing recipes as well as adding. But for right now, keep it simple, stupid. So, nice thing about a NoSQL database is that we can just willy-nilly decide what our schema is going to be. And we can actually, within reasonable limits, store different types of recipes in the same store, and that's fine. Just because you can do that doesn't mean we should. So I would say, and for the heck of it, let's go into a notes file just so that we can think separately. Recipe should have a title, the name of it. It should have ingredients. And by the way, we are going to make ingredients be just a block of text. But you could imagine that instead being an array of ingredients where you have the name of an ingredient and you have the quantity as well. We could get pretty complex with this. And then we'll have directions. And this will be basically, put your batter in, stir, whatever. This also, you can imagine being an array of, steps to take. And one of the things I enjoy about this live stream is I feel like every time I come in with an idea, as I'm working on it, I start thinking, all right, the next session we'll do this, and the session after that we'll do something else as well. It just kind of builds on it. More ideas come in, which is just fine. So title, ingredients, directions. Obviously, we could do a lot more, but let's just start off with something basic. So I'm going to have 3 fields. I'm going to have a label for title, and we'll say title, and close that, and input ID equals title, type equals text, and COMSOL like that. Milligram will make this form look a little bit nicer, but for right now, let's just keep it simple. We have a title. We have ingredients. And by the way, if I am misspelling ingredients, let me know. Ingredients, lowercase, and change the ID. And actually, this will be a text area. We will close that. We will do this like that. And then we have one more for directions. All right, almost there. Direction. Actually, you know what? Let's lastly add a input type equals submit, value equals save recipe. And let's see if I can still do basic forms. I can. And so the CSS framework I'm using removes all padding. So I'm going to quickly come up here and just do some inline styling on the body. And we'll do padding 50px. I don't really care. I just want it to be, there we go. All right. So we have our form field. We have our form. So we need to tie this up such that when we save, we can actually do a CRUD operation. I'm going to make some more variables. I like to use $ variables for variables that point to the DOM. It's a reminder of jQuery and just helps me kind of visually separate DOM variables versus other ones. So we will have title field, ingredients field, and what I call it, directions. Did I call it directions in code? I did, yep. Directions field. And we will set these up in our init. Say title field equals document query selector title. And we have 3 of these. So bam, bam. Ingredients. All right. Ingredients. And the last one, directions. And this is why I use Alpine.js to kind of save me on some of this. Save recipe button. Did I give it an ID? I did not. ID equals save recipe. So we will say save recipe recipe button equals save recipe. All right. Whew. All right. All that's doing is giving me pointers to my DOM. And the last thing I want to do is say save recipe button, add event listener, click. And you know what? I'm actually going to change this from a submit to just be a button, because I don't want to have to worry about the form submitting. And close the button. All right. On submit, click. We will call it save recipe. And again, this needs to be more complex in the future to handle edits and stuff, but that's all right. So let's go to save recipe. Now, here is where I would typically have some validation and stuff. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to say let title equals title field dot value. Let ingredients equals ingredients field dot value. Let directions equals directions field dot value. And first off, let's just make sure we have this working. We will log everything. Go back, go to my console, add event listener. So I messed up my document query selector. Save recipes, save recipe. So let's do, actually, copy and paste this, drop it into console and see if I messed that up. Wow, allow pasting. Yes, I know what I'm doing. All right, that worked. So what did I mess up? Save or add event listener, click, oh, because it's the actual function, not the name of the function. Thank you for not calling me out on that. But we'll do A, B, C, and it's still submitting. So we will go in here and say prevent default. A lot of work to just get basic stuff done. Boom, and just modify just to be sure. All right, cool. So now we need to work with the database and actually save the record. And yes, I am looking at just some existing code I have just to make sure I do it the right way. All right. So our database can give us access to our object store. And with our object store, we could save information. In order to do that, we need to work with a transaction. So what I'm going to do is say let transaction equals DB transaction. The transaction method essentially creates a transaction on your database. The first parameter is the object stores that you're going to work with. Now, typically a transaction will involve one object store, but you may have multiple. But the point is this will be an array, and you will provide a list of the object stores that you care about. The next thing is you will tell it, am I doing a read transaction or a read-write transaction? We're going to be writing, so we will call it read-write. So transaction is also asynchronous and also event-based. So I'm going to do two things here. Actually, I'm going to come back to that looking at my code. So when you have a transaction object, from that, it's like a wrapper, I can get my object store. So I'm going to say let recipe store equals transaction object store recipes. So basically, telling the database, hey, buddy, I'm fixing to do a read-write operation. I want to wrap this in a transaction so it is safe. I've created the transaction. From the transaction, I'm going to grab an object store. And then here comes the fun part. I can go recipe store, and I could store my object with just a put command. Now, recipe does not exist yet. But I'm going to do this. Let recipe equals, and I'm going to spell it right, title, ingredients, directions. Now, don't forget what I'm doing here is shorthand JavaScript. So when you have a key value of the same name, so I want an object property called title and value of title. In modern JavaScript, you can just skip that. And it's a nice shorthand. Again, no SQL database. So I didn't have to define my schema. I'm just going to drop a JavaScript object in there. The put command, there is a add. I'm pretty sure it's add. Instead of me just saying, we will go into the object store reference and look at the methods. Yeah, so there is a add method, but the put method is handy because it handles both creating new objects and updating existing objects. Right now, we don't have any kind of schema in terms of like a unique identifier. We're going to need that. But for right now, if we just use put, it will work for a new recipe. It will work for an old recipe. It will just plain work. Now, everything is asynchronous. In this case, we are going to listen for events on the transaction. So I can go in here and do two of them. I'm going to do an on error. And for right now, it's nothing, but I'll get back to that in a minute. And I have some space there. I have a transaction dot on complete, not on success, which is what we used in the database opening. For transactions on complete, we are going to say equals E do something. So, like the database thing I did, in order to make this work with async await and all that, I am going to use promises. So this whole thing is going to be wrapped in a new promise. So we will go here. I will spell promise correctly, make my resolve, reject, and get that in there and close it up, home saw like that. And I will just say when it completed, resolve, like we're all good. I don't need to return anything. In fact, I'm pretty sure nothing actually gets returned, but we can actually look at that on complete E. And then for the error, I am just going to reject it. And in theory, my code should handle that, but it doesn't. So I have my code. I am getting from the DOM, and then I'm doing all this. And yeah. So that's it for now. Like I keep thinking there's definitely more I need to do here. Potentially like clear the form fields. So we could do title field dot value equals blank and repeat that for our 3 form fields. And kind of basically reset back so we can keep adding more stuff. Directions. Okay, so only took us an hour, but let's see if now, and we'll call this title 1, ingredient 1, directions 1, and click. Oh, fail store uses autoline keys and has no key generator. It is interesting that on complete fired as well as on error. I guess the transaction ended, but it ended in a error. I'm just wondering if it doesn't really return anything there. So this brings me back to something I kind of mentioned about how our database doesn't have any primary keys or anything like that. I honestly thought that we didn't need to worry about that initially and that it would take a default, but this may be a change in how IndexedDB has worked. So this is a good opportunity to go back and just add that, and I'll show you how that's done. So I'm gonna go back to get database. Now, I'm gonna be changing the structure of my database. I should change that number. Instead, what I'm gonna do is drop the entire database, which, you know what, we'll go ahead and do that now. Storage, clear site data, IndexedDB is gone. We're going to go back to where we create our object store right here, and then start using the parameters. Now, there's 2 that we're going to care about. There's a couple of more that you could do here, but we're going to keep it simple. I'm going to do 2 things. First thing we're going to do is we're going to tell it what our primary key is, and that is with a key path, and I'm going to give it a name of ID. Now, if I did just that, I would be responsible for ensuring that ID exists and ensuring there's no conflicts. If I'm doing an add, if I'm doing an update, they'll just overwrite. But I'm going to ask it to create, an auto increment true. Basically, this should be all it takes to say, if I don't give you an ID value, you're going to generate it and you're going to automatically increment it. So that will give us a primary key. This will support editing and stuff later and deleting as well, which is nice. Honestly, did not remember that this was required. I really thought it wasn't, but save it and go back to our browser, and it auto reloaded. On upgrade needed, ran again. Let's look in DevTools and see if it actually reflects that change to our object store. Look at recipes. It does know a key path and knows a value. Let's go ahead and write a recipe and see what happens. A, B, B, C, 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 and it's gonna work. It's gonna work. Click. Yes. I got my on complete. I went ahead and wiped it out. If we go look at our database and hit refresh, boom, we have a recipe. And there is the object. And that, again, that ID value is automatic. If I do something new and hit save, and DevTools recognize, hey, I may be out of date, reload, boom, there is my new date, my new record. Cool. So in 50-ish minutes, we got add working. So, typically when people think about databases, they think about like CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. So we have create working. For the heck of it, I think we have enough time. Let's actually go ahead and do a get and get all of our recipes from the database. So I already have a div for that. Let's go back to our code. This is our init, so where we get the database, we have the event listener for, say, recipe. What I want to do is say, I want to get my current recipes, and I want to render them. Let's make this two functions, but let's just start with render recipes. And right now my browser will have an error because I don't have that, but that's all right. So async function render recipes. First thing you're going to do is say let recipes equals get recipes, and actually await get recipes. And then we will console.log the result. Recipes. So I'm going to build another function, also async, that's going to get all of my data from my database. So once again, we're going to use a transaction. So I'm going to say let transaction equals DB. Remember, we created a global variable DB that points to our database. Transaction, transaction. Yep. The list of object stores is just recipes. This time we are read only. And it's actually read only, not read. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to grab my store, transaction, object store, recipes, and then say store.getAll. Let recipes equal store.getAll. Now this is actually going to return a request. And that request will have a on success that gets past all of the records. So we're just going to see e.target.result. Now we need to make this better, but if I save this, I should see a log of my two records. And we do. Great. So now let's start wrapping this up. I'm going to do that same promise wrap thing. Return new promise, resolve, reject. I'm going to get this done right on time. I like that. And console like that. And we are just going to resolve e-target.result. Is that fine? Yeah, I'm fine just resolving that. We should have a transaction on error for completeness sakes. But again, I'm just going to reject it for now and let my code later on that I'll definitely absolutely write take care of that. And we don't need a console anymore. And let's actually show it up here. So now, in theory, render recipes, we'll have it. And yes, we're still getting it. So let's, did I put an ID for that div? I did, recipe list. Let's add it to my list of DOM variables. recipe list. Let's initialize it up here. Recipe, you know what? Recipe list. I should make that. I'm using field, I'm using button, recipe list div. I should do that. And that is recipe list. We are almost done. And we are just going to, for right now, we're going to render, I think, just the titles. And I can imagine maybe clicking to show everything. But with recipes being kind of big, for our list, we want to keep it nice and simple. So let's start with let s equals h2 recipes. And then recipes for each are nice and simple. R plus equals template string. You know what? Let's actually do start an unordered list. It's kind of ugly HTML, but that's all right. And we called it title. Close the li. And then, oh, not R. It is S. And then we will end the list plus equals. Whew, I'm running out of steam here. Last thing, recipe list div dot enter HTML equals S. And then if I hit save, come back, there we go. No clue why. Did I do OL, UL, and UL? I have no idea why it's doing kind of a weird, irregular. It's kind of an irregular, but that could be milligram as well. Anyway, let's do one more thing. I'm going to go into our add recipe, save recipe. So here we kind of clean up the DOM. Let's go ahead and run render recipes again. Save it. And now I'll type in a new one and hit save. And bam, we got it. Yeah, third one. So, all right. This is a little bit messy. So I like, for example, something that I consider a bit messy. That I consider a bit messy. I could potentially see having my save recipe event handler focus on DOM stuff, like get my DOM fields, and then call off to another method that only handles database persistence. So essentially, I could have event handlers in my code that are responsible for looking at the DOM, updating the DOM. I could have other methods who only care about database operations, and I have a nice separation. We can do that, but what premature premature optimization is a bad idea. Two questions from Sue. Thank you, Sue. You win for being the only one commenting today. But let me show your second question first. Do you have to do any escaping of special characters? Yeah, I mean, so if you're taking data willy-nilly from an API, for example, and then rendering it in HTML, then you have security to worry about. In this case, it's user-entered data, and only I can see it. So if I were trying to attack myself, that seems, I don't think that would be an issue. I could, instead of doing it just a blanket enter HTML of title, I could set the text property of a span tag, for example. That would make it a bit safe. I think that is overkill. And for IndexedDB, again, being that it's my data only, you probably don't have to worry about that. But I've never heard of somebody getting screwed by being extra secure. So there's that. And then I want to show the second question you asked. I imagine you could have a site of recipes and give the user the option to put each. Yeah. So Sue, you're touching on a very large topic of what if I want IndexedDB to be a copy of a server database? That is an option. Yes. You begin to get into the complex notion of Do I want to give the user everything or maybe just a subset? Like Sue, your particular example of their favorite recipes, that would be a subset. Uh, the next question is Sue has saved 3 recipes. How do I handle updating Sue's copy of that? Well, you can do things like if a recipe has a last updated date, you can, when they hit the website, look at their IndexedDB, look at their saved recipe, compare it to the server copy, see if you need an update. Things get more complex if you want the ability for Sue to edit content in their local DB and have that update to server. And then you have the whole issue of security, different users doing edits, resolving merges, and all that. I definitely, I do not want to touch that at all. Um, what I have done in the past is server is truth and client's a copy. And that makes it a bit easier because you could basically say, hey, if the server has any new date time field value newer than me, I just wipe out my copy. That particular use case is a bit simpler. So let me switch back to this and get back to my face looking at y'all and hide your banner. Um, oh, and actually, Sue, can a third-party script access a site's IndexedDB? It's no. I am mostly sure about that. I'm so it's definitely sandboxed, right? So yeah, the site's running. If the code is running from a third-party domain, the answer is no. I'm saying that with 99% surety. But Sue, that is something that we can test. I definitely have in mind now a couple more follow-ups on this. We got to create and we got to read and actually read all. There's also read one. Um, but that is something that we can test. I'm 99.9% sure, but we can test that. So that was a fun hour. Thank you, Sue, in particular, for the great questions. Anybody else watching, if you have any questions later, leave a comment. You can email me as well. I am going to put this code up on CodeBR, my GitHub repository, and it's IDB1, and I'm going to leave it at that. So in our next session, when we build upon this, will be a new folder, so you don't have to worry about changes after today. And that is it. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you for your time and attention, and bye.